the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Morning.
Morning.
Hope everyone's doing well on this beautiful rainy day. Definitely needed some rain. If you recall last week, we conducted a whirlwind tour of the Sermon on the Mount. This gave us an idea of the flow and the content of Jesus' most important sermon. We noted that the beginning of the spiritual life begins with following the commandments of Christ, and the Sermon on the Mount contains and explains many of these commandments. And we saw that in many ways the Sermon on the Mount summarizes the Christian walk, or what we must do to follow Jesus. Today's passage recounts the events immediately after the Sermon on the Mount. The text tells us that after he came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him as he was walking, and came to him. A leper came to him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus stretched out his hand to the leper, saying, "I am willing, be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. Now it seems in the Bible that the term leprosy includes a number of skin diseases. While leprosy itself is incurable, people were able to recover from other certain skin diseases. Thus, in the book of Leviticus, we are given instructions on how a person was declared clean. The former leper was to show themselves to be a priest, to be declared clean, and then offer the prescribed sacrifice to the Lord. Lepers were the outcasts of their society. Having leprosy made a person ceremonially unclean for life or for as long as they had the skin disease. If anyone would touch or come in contact with the leper, they too were ceremonially unclean. Jesus could have spoken a word and cleansed the leper, but he made a point of reaching out and touching him. So in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus raised the spiritual level of the law's teaching and of the law's understanding. And here he demonstrates it. He disregards the ceremonial prescriptions of the law, and he teaches by example that the law of love takes precedence over the written law. After healing the man, he instructs him to show himself to the Pharisees so he can be declared ceremonially clean and then offer the prescribed sacrifice. So after cleansing the leper, Jesus enters Capernaum. And this is actually the beginning of today's gospel. It's the healing of the Centurion's servant. After leaving his home in Nazareth, Jesus appears to have made his home in Capernaum, or at least it was the base city of his ministry. Frequent passages in the New Testament speak of Jesus being in Capernaum. Now, there are two accounts of the healing of the Centurion's servant in the Gospels. There is today's passage and a passage in Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. Luke's account gives more details than Matthew's, and there appears to be a little bit of a contradiction between the two passages. In Matthew's passage, the one we're looking at today, we are told that the centurion came to Jesus and spoke to him. While in the Lucan passage, it says the centurion heard that Jesus had entered Capernaum, and he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come and save the life of his slave. Now, there are two popular ways of understanding this supposed contradiction. The first, which I believe is the correct one, teaches that the centurion sent a delegation to Jesus to speak in his name. Matthew may have mentioned this delegation because he did not think it was important for the purpose in his writing his epistle or his gospel. And the other view is that the centurion first sent a delegation to speak with Jesus, and then he himself went out to speak with Jesus. This is very possible, but Luke tells us that when Jesus was nearing the house, the centurion sent some friends and told him not to come into his house. So I believe that Jesus never actually spoke to the centurion face to face. I think this makes his faith and trust in Jesus even more remarkable. So in following Luke's account, Jesus enters Capernaum, and a delegation of Jewish elders who was sent by the centurion approached Jesus and requested he come and save the centurion's servant. They earnestly implore him and practically beg him to come. They hold the centurion in the highest regard. They explain to Jesus that he loves the nation of Israel, and they even built a synagogue in Capernaum for the people. So this was no ordinary centurion. He may have been a God believer. A God believer was a person who sympathized with the Jewish faith and observed some of the Jewish laws and rituals, but did not become a full proselyte, never fully converted to Judaism. So if he was a God-fearer, he would not be able to convert to Judaism because he would then lose his commission. But he definitely had a soft spot in his heart for the Jewish nation and their religion. So this passage speaks much about the faith of the centurion, but it also highlights his deep humility. In the few verses we looked at already, we see his humility in two ways. The first is in approaching Jesus and asking him to come and heal his servant. The centurion was a Roman soldier who had approximately 100 soldiers serving under him. As a centurion, he may have been one of the chief Roman officials in the city of Capernaum. So not only could he command the soldiers, but as a leading Roman official of the conquered Jewish people, he could have also commanded the Jewish people. So he could have commanded Jesus to come, but instead he humbled himself and sent a delegation of Jewish men to speak in his behalf. Perhaps he thought Jesus would be more inclined if he heard the request from Jewish people. A second way in which he shows his humility, as a request for healing was not for a family member, it wasn't for one of his army colleagues, but it was for a servant, a slave. Matthew and Luke each use a different word to describe this person who was healed, this servant. The word Matthew uses is most often translated a servant and has the idea of being an attendant. The word Luke uses is most often translated slave. And it has the idea of being subject to somebody, but not necessarily in bondage. So it wasn't an evil bondage. So it is very possible that the servant of the centurion was his personal attendant. So his request for healing shows the tender heart of the centurion. Jesus then starts on his way to the centurion's home. As he neared the home, the humility of the centurion is again shown. He sends a delegation, some friends to Jesus, and tells them he is not worthy for Jesus to come under his roof. So he may have known that Jews were not to enter the homes of Gentiles, and he did not want to put Jesus in a compromising situation. But he does say he is not worthy. He saw or heard about Jesus. He not only believed that Jesus had the power to heal, but he also may have heard about his message. Jesus was ministering often in Capernaum, so he may have even heard him speak. So he knew that Jesus could not only heal, but he was a holy and righteous man. And the humble centurion saw Jesus as a better man than himself. So his message continues, and he says that he too was a man under authority, that he had soldiers under him, and he can tell one to go, and he would go. He could tell another one to come, and he would come. And he would tell someone to do something, and it would get done. So what he is saying is that he was under authority, but he also had people under authority to him. And then when he gave an order, it was obeyed. So he saw Jesus not necessarily as God, but a man who was under God and had the power of God working in him. He recognized the authority of God working in Jesus. So ultimately what he says is that he believed that Jesus only had to say the word and his servant would be healed. Jesus' physical presence was not necessarily for his servant to be healed. He recognized Jesus had this power and authority. When Jesus heard this message, he marveled. There are only 2 times in the Gospels where it says that Jesus marveled. The first is here with the centurion, and the other, he marveled at the unbelief of the people of Nazareth, their lack of faith when he was preaching and ministering to them. So the centurion's faith was not faith in Jesus, the Son of God, for he calls him a man like himself, but he was on his way to the true faith. Jesus says he had not seen such great faith with anyone in Israel. So the faith of the humble centurion actually shamed the people of Israel. So at this point in the story, Matthew records a statement of Jesus that's not recorded in Luke's account. He says, "I say unto you that many will come from the east and the west, and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into utter darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Here, rather early on in his earthly ministry, Jesus is making a proclamation that the kingdom is not strictly for the Jewish people. Those Gentiles who show the faith of the centurion will also be included. Coming right after the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus once more expands the meaning of the law. The Jews believed they were the chosen people, and the kingdom of God was for them. Jesus said that his faith, not ethnicity, that will allow one to enter into God's kingdom. He even goes so far as to warn the Jews that not all the Jews will enter the kingdom. This message may have offended a number of the Jews present, and it may be the beginning of the hostility towards Jesus. After this saying, Jesus tells the delegation that they can depart. He says to them, "It will be done to you as you have believed." So it was the faith of the centurion that healed the servant. When those who were sent to him returned to the house, the servant was in good health. I wanted to highlight the humility of the centurion, because without the humility he demonstrated and lived by, he would never have been able to develop the faith and believe that Jesus could heal his trusted servant. The same is true for us. Humility is a non-negotiable in the Christian life. In addressing the monks in his monastery, Dorotheus of Gaza said, "Before anything else, we need humility, being ready to listen whenever a word is said to us and to say, 'I submit.'" He continues, "For through humility, every device of the enemy and every kind of obstacle is destroyed. In fact, humility protects the soul from all the passions and also from every temptation." But humility is a tricky virtue. The moment we think we have it, it is gone. And at times we meet people who are truly humble, but they never seem to recognize it in themselves. And once more referencing Dorotheus, he also teaches that no one can explain how humility comes about. It is generated in the soul. He says humility is learned by experience, not through verbal teaching. Verbal teaching can guide, but true humility comes through experience. Humility begins by following the commands of Christ. Dorotheus constantly teaches in all the discourses that he gives. If you can't tell, I've been reading Dorotheus this past week. He always tells us to pay attention to the small things in whatever virtue we are trying to develop, and then larger things will begin to form. So with humility, small things, such as keeping silent instead of putting forth your opinion. It says if you start thinking evil or bad thoughts about a person, put the thought out of your mind. And definitely do not say anything about this, but do not even offend the person through your thoughts. We begin with these small things as these, humility begins to develop. It soon becomes a habit, and the forms of humility begin to grow within us. This week, try to focus on those small things in learning humility. Practice small things. When you notice something in your heart that is not quite humble, just turn to the Lord in prayer, put it away, and try to live a more humble life. And just like I said, begin with small things. Try to make it a habit so humility can grow in your life. I'm going to end by returning to the theme of authority in today's gospel. The writer says, "In seeking humility, we place ourselves under the authority and direction of the Lord. We seek to trust him, to know him, and to obey him every moment. And when we do this, we find a peace and security that those who do not live under the law or follow Christ will never know. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind, always, now, and ever, unto the ages of ages."